School is back for 2024. We've all had our kids going out the door in their uniforms, all looking very smart. I don't know about your experience, but my kids were, when they were 4, all look very smart and prim and proper. When it gets to their age they're at now, it's just like, get out. But we've had a real challenge with that, as I've spoken about in previous videos. My daughter is school refusing, and she's at a special education needs school, but she's actually refusing to go to school. The school that she has been at have been great, but it's reached a point where it's not meeting her needs. What I didn't realize is just how widespread the issue of school refusal is, and even more so when it comes to neurodivergence. In that vein, I have with me the fantastic Moira Healy. Moira, how are you?
I'm really good. Thank you, Duncan. Yeah, how are you?
Not too bad. Yeah, plodding on, I
For a
think,
Tuesday?
for a Tuesday, Moira actually interviewed me for her podcast, which links for her podcast will be up in the description. It's fantastic. It's an audio podcast on Apple Podcasts and all other main podcast arenas that you can go to. So please do go check it. I'll put the link in the description. It is absolutely fantastic, and she speaks to some amazing people. But I wanted to turn the tables and talk to Moira because obviously school refusal is something that's really hitting us. And as I said, it's hitting so many other kids. Moira, how did you get into this arena?
Okay, so school, I'm going to pick you up on something actually, Duncan.
You do
So
that.
using your terminology, school refusal, I'll go into that in a minute, but actually a preferred term would be school avoidance or school can't. On
I'm
that is
Australian.
because
When I say school can't, it comes across very differently. Just the sound of the way Australians say can't can be misinterpreted. So
let's go with school avoidance. Let's
avoidance, I
let's
think, will
just
be the
yeah, let's just avoid any
best.
misinterpretation at all. Let's go with school avoidance. So the reason that term is preferred is because as soon as you say school refusal, it almost puts the onus for that on the child. It's a child refusing to do something, and that's where the can't bit comes in, because actually it isn't that they are refusing to do it, it is literally that they can't. And the reasons for that I will go into, I'm sure, within this conversation. But going back to your original question, how did I get into that? Essentially, it was kind of a hybrid between personal work that I was doing. I was training as an emotions and trauma release practitioner at the same time as COVID hit, and my son was 11. And through the effects of COVID, as with many, many children and adults, anxiety went through the roof. Essentially, through the work that I was doing, the tools and the techniques that I had learned meant that I was very quickly and easily able to transition my son out of that anxiety. It led to it being highlighted for me just how many kids out there were struggling, and therefore consequently how many parents were struggling, because when our kids struggle, we struggle, right? so
That gets
so
missed often, doesn't it? You've got I know that something that you have is a whole family approach.
yeah, I would say it's a whole family approach, but actually where I always start is with the parents, because essentially it's how that parent responds and reacts, which is totally going to inform how that child responds and reacts. So if a parent is going in with fear, worry, anxiety themselves, panic, desperation, and all the energies that go with those big emotions that that parent will feel when they see their child struggling, that energy is automatically transferred to the child, and that child feeds off that energy. They see their parents scared, and therefore not only does it make them more fearful of what they're going through, but also it puts them in a position where they don't feel capable, and they already don't feel capable.
Yeah.
And also a very common thought pattern with all of that for that child or teenager is, I'm doing something wrong, I'm failing, I'm letting people down. And so basically all of those emotions of both parent and child start feeding off each other, and it just becomes this non-perfect storm of heightened emotions. And and kind of it gets you into a position where everybody starts throwing spaghetti at the wall to try and fix it and to try and get it better or make their teen not so anxious, and everybody goes into a bit of a spin and a bit of a spiral. Parents can have a major influence, and I almost go to the point of saying even more so than a therapist. Now, therapy is brilliant and it's absolutely hugely beneficial. However, that child or teen will likely have resistance around that therapy to begin with. There's a lot of mistrust, certainly at the beginning, between that therapy or that therapist and the child and that relationship. So that takes time to build. And all of that is surmountable. But also you're looking at a time factor. The therapist can see that child like once a week, maybe for an hour. So the time frame of the messages that therapist is trying to get through, or the issues that therapist is working on with that child, it's very contained within that hour. So the whole process takes so much longer. And on top of that, if the parent is not involved in that therapy session, which often they are not, they're not getting those messages. They're not hearing what that therapist is saying or what that therapist is trying to get across to that child. And so there could be a bit of a mismatch too.
Not singing from the same hymn sheet, are you? You end up in a
No.
situation that I've experienced this myself, is that because that's not being communicated back to us as parents, we're carrying on with what we're doing, not realizing that there's something else being introduced that might be more beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I am not dissing therapy in the slightest.
No,
My goodness,
absolutely
it can
not.
have huge effects. But what I do tend to find is that parents often feel very helpless when they see their teen struggling. By handing it over to an external source, they kind of, I'm not saying they sit back, but they almost go into that helplessness even further because they're, well, I can't help. The therapist knows all this stuff, and that just simply isn't true.
Yeah.
The biggest influence is always going to be the parent, because that's who role models, that's who speaks to that child 24/7, that's who's there.
Hearing you say that is just such a relief, because I think it's something that so often gets missed in so many ways. And in fact, it's often the opposite happens. Rather than it being parents being included, it leads to the parent blame, which I've talked about loads, but it becomes something's wrong at home. Something's not right. Something needs to be fixed in the home, because things like masking, they're fine in school, but then suddenly they're not going. It creates that, must be something wrong here. To hear you say that your parents know their kids better than anyone else, it's something that gets missed so often. I think it's coming back in now, and there's an understanding there, but it's a slow process. It's been the opposite for a long time, where you get this almost, and again, I'm not trying to diss therapists, I'm not trying to diss anyone, but it's something that unless you can highlight these issues, they're not going to get addressed. But it very much becomes an us versus them thing between the professionals and the parents. It happens with schools as well, whereas we should be all working together. And if we can work together, that communication is therefore more enhanced. You're working from the same, you're singing from the same hymn sheet, if you like. You're moving in the direction together. It makes such an incredible difference.
Yeah, and I always encourage parents as well to question what professionals are saying, because again, it goes back to that gut instinct of a parent.
Yeah.
You know your child. You see them all day, every day, maybe not all day, but you see them. Thank God. I think we do. We all need a break.
I keep a jar of chloroform in the cupboard just in case.
But you know what makes them tick. You know where their triggers are. You might not know what to do about those triggers, but essentially you know when something's wrong.
Yeah.
And for all the good that these professionals can do, and absolutely work with them completely, but never undermine or never underestimate that instinct that you have as a parent. And, you know, you've got to temper that as well. You've got to have a certain amount of self-awareness as a parent of, okay, where is this gut instinct coming from? Is it coming from what I'm objectively observing about my child, or is it coming from panic? Oh my God, they're going to F up their whole future, or do you know what I mean? So there's a balance in it all, but never dismiss a gut instinct as a parent.
I think that's the
Absolutely.
key, isn't it? Rather than just reacting to it immediately, it's being prepared to, is it going to make a difference if you act on it this second, or if you
Yeah.
take a day to consider it and work through it? It can be a
Yeah.
much healthier approach.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Maybe even write down those observations for yourself, you know, almost kind of journal it out. Was this my mood on that day, or is there something that I should explore further in terms of my child? What I always, again, encourage is for parents to go into this with curiosity, because curiosity just allows you to explore further and deeper rather than impulsive reactions or spontaneous actions in some way that may not be so well considered. Yeah,
I
it's
love that. I've never heard it called curiosity before, but yeah, absolutely. It's something that, when we first realized my daughter was neurodivergent, and I ended up doing a lot of research. Yeah, I've talked about I went through the whole sort of 5 stages of mourning and all that kind of stuff because it was the way I had to process it, really. Rightly or wrongly, that was the way I was processing it. Then you come to that sort of point of acceptance. And I've said you often move on to advocacy. I think for a lot of parents, that's the case. I started researching. It's how I, became so okay, knowledgeable in the areas that I am knowledgeable in. It was purely because I wanted to understand and support my daughter better. It's like you say, that curiosity. I want to know more about this and I want to understand more about it. The only way you can do that is to sort of go down a bit of a rabbit hole in many ways. But I think if you're, taking that curiosity back to what you were talking about, if you've got something that your gut is saying, I don't feel this is right, approaching that from a curious perspective. Why am I thinking that? What is causing that mistrust or that gut instinct of something's not quite right with that, or this isn't going to work for my family? PDA, we obviously speak about PDA a lot on this. Like you said, that whole thing of introducing therapy suddenly becomes a demand.
mm,
And we've had an interesting thing. I was speaking to Laura Kirby, and she was saying that we forget the demands come internally. And it was a light bulb moment again for me, even after all these years, because my daughter's been begging for therapy. She's been begging for some support with her mental health. When we got that organized, she didn't want to go.
mm,
And I just hadn't clicked in my head that, of course, it's an internal demand. She
yeah,
wants this, but it's now creating a demand. So for my daughter, for a PDA or in general, probably, the issue is going to be that they can't get over their own demand in that. So introducing therapy or somebody else into the picture is going to create that situation. Approaching that from that curiosity perspective, you can then unpick that. And
yeah.
actually, why isn't that work? Now I understand. And I think it becomes easier to communicate it when you're talking to professionals and you're talking to schools and all this kind of stuff. Being able to say, I feel this because of this, or I'm objecting to this because of this, or I'm supporting this because of this. When you're backing it up with that curiosity that has been rewarded with knowledge, it then becomes something that you can justify.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think going back to the case of your daughter with going to see this psychotherapist, what will be going on there is literally a fear of what is going to happen because it's something new. It's way out of her comfort zone. And even though she doesn't want to be stuck where she is,
Yeah.
and in theory, she wants things to change and she wants to feel better, really, what is coming up for her there is this big emotion of, well, I don't know what's on the other side. And that's incredibly scary for anybody,
Well,
let
if you
alone,
compile that with the anxiety that is already experienced by so many neurodivergent people, it's another anxiety, isn't it? And that's where
yeah,
you get to your fight, flight, freeze, fawn, and you're going to
yeah.
experience one of those.
Absolutely. That's the thing. We all go into these stress responses in new situations that we either feel out of control with or that is the unknown.
Yeah.
And so with that one, yes, you may be seeing resistance around getting her to that psychotherapist, but that doesn't mean to say it's off the table, it's off the cards forever. What that's going to require is just encouraging her, helping her to ease into the idea of that. And again, that's going to take time.
It's
and
funny
it's
because
helping her to feel emotionally safe around it.
interestingly, that's kind of what's happened, because once I'd identified it's the PDA side of things for her. It was, well, how do I give her a sense of control in this? And it was actually in the end that we just offered, I said to the therapist, look, how about we do it via Teams or by Zoom or whatever, so that she doesn't have to leave her safe environment. And then I offered it to her as, we can still go in if you want to see them face to face, but they've offered us this opportunity. If you'd rather do that, go for it. And that's what she picked. And it meant that we were at home in her safe environment, familiar. It provided a bit of a distance in a way that she could disengage when she needed to for her own self, regulation.
Yeah.
But then engage when it was necessary. So
yeah,
those things, isn't it? Picking and finding ways around.
absolutely. It's all about helping her to feel more emotionally safe and in control of her own situation, and handing it over to her. As you so rightly did, it's like, okay, here's some options. What do you think? We so often inadvertently we remove that choice for our children because we feel as the adult that we have the best interests for them at heart. We know what's best. We know the outcome of those sessions would likely be a positive one, but we tend to try to force that as opposed to handing it over and going, this is what's on the table. What do you think? What do you feel you're capable of? For anybody else who's in a similar situation there, I mean, luckily your daughter, or not luckily, it's because you gave her those options, was able to find that place where she's like, oh yeah, that would work for me. Even for somebody else going through the same thing, it's just like, okay, how about you just do 10 minutes? And you make sure, and you arrange that with the psychotherapist, and you make sure that 10 minutes is 10 minutes. It doesn't go over. You don't push, nobody pushes those boundaries. It's like 10 minutes. What do you think? Do you think you could do 10 minutes? Yes or no? It's up to you. And there is no judgment, there's no criticism, there's no sense of disappointment on my part as a parent if you can't. This is your call.
Sometimes just allowing that 10 minutes isn't 10 minutes better than 10 minutes of engagement better than an hour of disengagement. And
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And also, if you're stringent with that and it is only 10 minutes, that can leave them actually wanting, it's like, oh, well, that really was only 10 minutes. And actually, that wasn't bad at all. And it leaves them with a positive rather than, oh, that 10 minutes went really well. Let's push it a bit longer. And then you lose them after 14 minutes. And the experience becomes a negative one because they're like, you said it was 10 minutes and it went over, So be child-led completely, but also make sure that those boundaries are in place and what you're promising to that child happens, because hopefully there's another opportunity to get them out of that comfort zone again, but on their terms.
I want to challenge that in a way, not necessarily believe, but play the devil's advocate in it.
Yeah, do.
The challenge would be, and I know a lot of people think this, and I think a lot of people who don't have neurodivergent kids or haven't experienced this with their kids at this point would react, and it's certainly how I'd have reacted in the past, would be to say that, but sometimes you've got to push kids into doing something. If we're too child-led, then they have no boundaries. And we do see evidence in the world of those boundaries being taken away, and teachers having a lot more to deal with at schools now because they don't have the same sort of ability to reprimand and all that kind of stuff. What do you say to that in these situations where, I'm going to bring it back to PDA again, just because obviously it's what we deal with, but I think it's something that's really interesting, is that I did a video on it I call it the PDA paradox, which is that you need that my daughter needs to feel that sense of control. Tied into that with PDA is a real necessity for firm boundaries, and they don't work together very well. They're
Yeah,
the opposite ends of the seesaw, if you like. Trying
yeah,
to balance that is really challenging. How do you do that when you're trying to be child-led, but you also can't let it become something where the child is taking over? Does that,
yeah,
yeah,
yeah, absolutely, completely hear you. And that's where the foundations come in. Because if you have worked with your child enough to build up that parent-child respect, trust, communication, connection, the biggest person they will trust is you.
yeah,
They will trust you as the parent. So, in that situation where you feel like they do need to be pushed, because otherwise they're just going to stay stuck and the fear is going to be too overwhelming for them and they will not make any progress. What's so important there is you work with your child, with your team, side by side with them, and you say something like, I know this is a massive challenge for you. I would not be we would I would not be asking this of you. You'd have to, again, it depends on your child and your communication with your child,
yeah.
but essentially it comes down to, I am right here with you at all times. And if at any time this genuinely becomes too much, too distressing, then you must communicate that to me. But I genuinely believe that inside of you, you can do this. So you lead with the belief in your child. That's what you lead with. You lead with the love, you lead with the compassion, you lead with the understanding, and you lead with the trust and the belief that your child can make it. Because if they feel that from you,
Yeah.
they will have a chance of feeling it for themselves. And that's when you can push, but you've got all the scaffolding around them to help them believe that they can push themselves too. And that doesn't come overnight. That is a whole process. That is a whole, but essentially that's what you're working on every single day, whether there's a crisis or not. And that comes in active listening to your child. That comes in totally being fully engaged with them, not on your phone, not at your computer, not half listening. It's those foundations that you're putting into place every single day in every single interaction with them, where they know and trust you completely. Then, as a parent, you can start to gently push, and it won't feel like force, and it won't feel, hopefully, it may still feel like a demand, but it'll have softer edges.
Cushioned in a way, isn't it? I think it reminds me of the whole low demand language that we can use. And if anybody hasn't looked at low demand language, there's some great books on it. I'll put links in the description. But it's a really good way, even if you're not dealing with things like demand avoidance or pathological demand avoidance or any of those kind of things. Low demand language is something that can really help. And it's basically the premise is that you take the idea of you need to do this to we can do this, let's do this. So you're making it something that you're standing alongside your young person with by engaging in a way that is, let's do this together. It creates a side by side. And the best way to lead often is with your arm around and guiding. And I think it encourages that kind of metaphorical way of doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is the thing. And, taking this back to school avoidance, it's all about working with your child around that school avoidance rather than against them. Because unfortunately, when school avoidance comes up, it sends that parent into all those big emotions that we've already discussed. And it can almost become a battle between child and parent. That is the last thing that works, and the last thing that either you or your child needs in that situation. So it's always about working with your child around whatever is coming up for them about school, and working together to resolve that. What they need to feel is that you are right there beside them, and together you'll work it out. Maybe you don't know how, and that's fine. And I don't think there's enough parents that say that either. Your child does not want answers for you. They don't want to be fixed. They don't even want the solution. What they want is to feel seen, heard, and understood, and to know that no matter what is going on for them, you're right there. And again, it goes back to that acceptance.
Yeah.
I'm accepting my child for all of it. Not, we talk about unconditional love, and it can roll off the tongue very easily. You know, do you unconditionally love your child? Well, of course I do. Where that slightly falls down, and it's a trap that some parents get caught in, is I'm not questioning that they don't unconditionally love their child, but conditions start to be put on that child, like going to school, that can undermine that. And inadvertently, your child will start to feel that, and they will see it as, I'm only lovable if I go to school.
Which triggers a resentment and makes love finite.
It triggers all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Yeah. And all sorts of big emotions that actually you want to get your child out of, not further into.
Something you said there, you're talking about there, the idea of unconditional love. Something that I've always been an advocate, and I know that you're an advocate for, is the love languages and understanding love languages. And I think that really ties in, because I know from my own experience, my daughter's love language, primary love language, I've done videos on this, by the way, you can go check them out. I'm going to be doing another one looking at the neurodivergent love languages, because they are different. That will be in a few weeks probably. The idea being that my primary love language is words of affirmation. Someone tells me I'm doing well, I'm like, oh, that's going to really give me a boost. And I feel that as a form of love. So I give that back. I tell my kids they're amazing, you're doing it. But actually, my daughter's love language is probably quality time and gift giving, with the two primaries that sort of balance themselves out. Being able to communicate in a way that she will see as love, because she's not A, in the right headspace, and B, probably old enough to really gather that information and that understanding. So it's up to me to be able to relay her importance to me, my love for her, in a way that she will understand.
And be able to receive it.
Yes.
And hear it. And most importantly, feel it. That's what our kids, there is so much emphasis given to mental health. But I think what that term does is almost say, okay, well, it's all around, it's all up here. And it isn't. So much of this is mind and body. And we cannot treat the mind without treating the body. Our teenagers or our children, and us adults, we're never able to think our way out of things. We think we can, but it's utterly impossible. You know, if you get too much in your head, you're screwed, you know, because the thoughts are just too fast, too negative. You know, what we have to do is take it to the body. And that's all about soothing, feeling, and healing, essentially. And again, it goes back to those stress responses. We don't feel stress responses so much in our head. We feel them in our body.
Yeah,
we feel frozen. We feel sick, you know, and it's about soothing out of that and feeling our way out of stuff. Yeah, there's mental stuff, you know, there's mind stuff, mindset stuff that you have to do as well. But we've got to treat the two in tandem. We cannot separate them.
I think that really highlights, I mean, it's something heard said many times, and you don't register it really, but I think we identify love too much as an emotion, and we forget that actually it's like, what was it? Love is a verb. It's a doing word. Love is seen in action. So you can't separate love, the feeling, from love as something that you're going to have to physically express one way or another, whether that's by words of encouragement or giving them a hug, or there's a physicality to it with whatever their love language is that they're going to receive. And I think we forget that. We forget that, we do. We're guilty of compartmentalizing even ourselves, aren't we? I've got my brain, I've got my arms, my legs, my torso, my head, my feet, my legs, whatever. But actually, they all need to work in synergy together. Otherwise, I'm going to fall over, or I'm going to, disengage completely, or whatever the result might be. We need to start thinking holistically, not in a ooga boogerish way, but actually genuinely, this is
This is
holistic,
how we work
whole
as
body,
humans.
mind and body. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Anxiety is a physical thing.
Yes.
It's a physiological, yes, it's fed by the thoughts that we have in our head. And like I say, the two work together, but primarily it's the body that feels it. Too often, I think, let's take it back to that school avoidance. When that child is in that stress response of, I can't, and it's a physical can't. They're either frozen, they're numbing out, they're going into fight, which is where you might see anger, defiance. They're hiding away, which is they're buried under the duvet and they can't even look at you. Whatever that stress response is, that is a physical reaction that they cannot be in control of in that moment. And often what we do as parents, we try to talk them out of that response. Oh, but if you just we logic and reason, to try to convince them and persuade them that it's not as bad as they feel. Yes, it is. And the only way through that is by sitting with them, breathing with them, holding them, if they'll let you, talking to them, absolutely, but with words of compassion and understanding. It's helping them to soothe, because that is the only way that stress response is going to come down. Not by shouting at them, bribing them, giving them a reward, giving them consequences, saying, oh my God, what about school? They are so far removed from that. No amount of logic and reason is going to work with your child in that situation. And if it does work, if they become compliant, we don't want that either, because what we're doing is we're sending them into a state of fear or being scared of some sort of consequence, where they will make themselves do it, but their body will also store that, and it's not a long-term solution.
No, and it's also what you're actually doing, and people don't realize, is we focus on the flight, fight, freeze, but we forget about fawn. And so, when someone's fawning, if you don't understand the meaning of fawning, it's people pleasing, essentially.
Yeah.
I've been guilty of it myself. You push them into a situation where they're basically fawning, but it's actually a trauma or a fear response, not them getting over it. It's actually a way of blocking it, and that's red flag straight away, really, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
There's so much more we can unpack in this, and if you're up to it, I definitely want to do some follow-ups to this, because I think we could talk for hours.
I think so.
But I'm gonna steal something from your podcast here. It was, your child is starting to become school avoidant. So I picked it up. And you're stuck. What's your top 3 pieces of advice that you can give to parents and carers when they're faced with that situation of, I'm not going in, or I don't want to go in?
I'll start with the biggest mistake. The biggest mistake that parents make, trying to make that child go to school. So they put the whole focus on school.
Yeah.
Totally upside down, round the hedges. You're not going to get anywhere. It's the analogy that I use is, you've got a fear of heights, right? And somebody says, go jump off that cliff. And they make everything about jumping off that cliff because it's good for you. It'll make you feel better. This is the best idea in the long run. Nothing that you say is going to make you want to jump off that cliff. If anything, it's going to send you running back to the hedges to hide even deeper, because what you're doing is you're blowing up the idea of that thing that they're terrified of. Essentially, don't try to make your child go to school. What you've got to work on is the things that are making your child not want to.
I got a picture there in my head, and I think it's worth sharing with you. Is you get in cartoons that whole thing of the monster creeping, and you've got it's a shadow, and then it's just like a mouse, but with the thing you get the teeth, and that it feels like that. You're creating this, but by focusing so much light on one area, you're
Yeah,
making it blow up in its appearance when it's actually
yeah.
something far smaller.
Yeah, and also the whole emphasis goes on all your actions, or the actions that you're wanting your child to take is about going to this place that they do not want to go to and can't go to. Take all of that away. None of this is not going to school is the result. So take the result away. And that feels terrifying
Yeah,
for parents
feels
because we are
counterintuitive.
indoctrinated with, but school is the best place for my child. The avoiding school doesn't need to be a permanent thing. Removing your child from that situation doesn't need to be a permanent thing. It could just be give them a break for a day. It completely depends on the circumstances and the severity of the avoidance. However, it's about really focusing instead of focusing in on school, what you're doing is focusing in on the well-being of your child.
Mm.
What is it that is so terrifying for them? So it's about listening, really listening, not to fix it, not to find a solution for it, but so you can fully understand it. I work with a client, her son was adamantly refusing not to go to school. I know. Eat my words. But yeah, her son was adamantly avoiding going into school. They sent him to one secondary school. Within 4 days, he was back at home, couldn't go. So she immediately re-enrolled him in another school. He had a break of about 4 months whilst that place came up. He was at home. All the anxiety disappeared. He was in a great place. As soon as it came around to go again, because he was in a better place, even he believed he could go back into that school.
Mm.
Day one rolls around. Within 10 minutes, he is freaking out and he has to come home again, because what she had done was put all her efforts into getting him back into school, but not resolving any of the emotional issues that he was experiencing about why that was so hard. And why that was so hard for him was the corridors were too busy. He felt like he didn't fit in. He felt like he wouldn't make any friends.
Yeah.
So all of that stuff, there was some sensory stuff there as well.
Yeah.
But all of that stuff is stuff that you can work on at home without school being in the equation. If she'd have used that format, and this is not parent blame, by the way,
Oh
this
no,
is
no,
just
this is
at all.
this
This
is
is just,
this is
okay,
what I
here's what you
call
could have tried.
this is the debrief, isn't it? Where you
Yeah, is
learn from your
working
mistakes.
on,
This is
yeah, working on those sensory
yeah,
issues that he may have had, his innate confidence, self-esteem. And then you're like, well, okay, but how do you build up somebody's self-esteem? It's self, isn't it? Oh my goodness, parents can do so much around that. You give them time. You ask them what they think. You praise them. Now, I know for PDAers, praise isn't always well received, is it? They find it incredibly difficult, but
this is
you
that thing
can
of the love languages that can actually, with the
absolutely
divergent love
see.
languages, they can be different, and you can do damage. It can be the opposite to what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, absolutely. But you find ways around that. Well, okay, how do I praise my child in a way that she can fully receive it and understand and not be resistant to it? So it's all these twists and turns. And this is where a parent is so influential, because a parent knows this stuff and you feel it from your teen. You know when your teen has had a good day. You know when they're slightly off. You know when you need to just back off and give them some space. You know this stuff intrinsically. You ask for 3 top tips. Take the focus off school and put it squarely on the well-being of your teen. Work on the issues that they have, work on the emotions they're feeling. And biggest tip is work on yourself, because there will be stuff that you're doing. There will be judgments that you're making, either about yourself or about your child. There will be things that are getting in the way of why you're taking certain actions. So going back to the mum who was having issues with her son going to secondary school, her biggest issue, or not biggest issue, but her underlying fear was, what are people going to think? If my child can't go to school, what are people going to think of me? They're going to think I'm a bad parent. They're going to think that he's stupid. Whatever. She had very fixed, conditioned beliefs around what it meant for her child not to go. And so that needed her to work on those, to actually let go of all that fear of judgment so that she could concentrate on the well-being of her child.
I think that's just so important, because, and it's one of those things I think it's important to note as well. It's not about feeling guilty about the things that you may be doing. Wrong's the wrong word almost, but those things you're inadvertently blocking.
Yeah,
With
absolutely. And again,
not about being guilty about it. It's about be celebrating. I'm recognizing this, which means that I can do better for my young person. So therefore, it's the reason to celebrate, not to listen to the devil on your shoulder all the time, but actually be positive about it.
Yeah. And again, Duncan, it goes back to that. Let's be curious around this.
Yes.
What am I maybe doing that is where I'm getting in my own way of what I want? Because all that mum wanted was for her son to be happy. Like any good parent, what the heck is a good parent? But like any natural parent feels is, I want my teen, I want my child to be happy, no matter what age they are.
Yep.
What do I maybe need to change within myself where I'm getting in my own way on that, and in the way of my child's happiness, well-being, recovery, healing, no matter, however you want to frame it. So the work always begins with you, but it is about being open and curious and forgiving of yourself. Self-compassion and compassion for your child are the two biggest things that can really propel this journey, because when we can get rid of judgments around ourselves, around our child, and maybe, making it wider around, judgments we make about others in the world, the injustices, and all of that. But it's about gaining clarity on, okay, where am I at? Where is my child at? What's really going on? This isn't about school. This is about stuff that school is bringing up. So what am I going to do about this stuff?
Absolutely brilliant. Moira, I want to thank you so much for having joined me on this.
So
it's been absolutely fascinating, and we will be doing this again, I promise, because there's so much more I think we can unpick in this. And like Moira said so many times, it's not something you fix in a day. It's going to be it takes time. And so we can sort of explore that. Thanks so much for joining us. I will see you again on the next episode. In the meantime, please do stay safe.